David Davis is the MP for Halton, Price and Howden. He says that UKIP's successes matter to the party. He's joining us on the line now. Mr Davis, good afternoon to you. Very good to have you on the programme.
Good afternoon.
Has your party misgauged the public mood and underestimated how well UKIP is doing?
I think a little bit, yes. I think the simple truth is the UKIP surge, that's what it was almost with very, very little organisation on the ground. Most local government battles, as it were, are battles of organisations. Like the Liberals always did terribly well at it. And this was done with almost nobody on the ground, no canvassing, very few leaflets and so on, and it picked up a public mood. Now, sometimes this happens and it vanishes. Back in, I think, 1989, there was a sort of 30% turnout or 30% vote for the Greens, and it just evaporated next time. In a European election, it evaporated. I think this one's not likely to evaporate so quickly, partly because this is not UKIP's best battleground. Their best battleground is the European Union elections next year, the MEP elections next year, in which they must be expected to do much better. So there's a sort of possibility of serious momentum, and my party has to take it seriously.
And what about this line that seems to come up quite a lot this week, that your party is out of touch, that it's full of very posh people? How do you break this perception of being so privileged?
Well, part of it is just a perception, but part of it is real too. And one of the reasons I said publicly, actually, we've got to get a grip of this particular public perception, is to put more people up front who are plainly not privileged, who come from a plainly different background. And there's been a lot of coverage in the last week of the latest appointments of Number 10, and I think two of them have been old Etonians, another one's been an old friend of David Cameron's. And we must make sure that we bend over backwards to avoid this appearance of cronyism and this appearance of just appointing our pals, because if you carry on like that, people will then think, well, you're not like us, you don't understand our lives, you don't, in the worst case, you don't care about our lives, and therefore we're not going to vote for you. So it is a real electoral issue.
And is UKIP now one of the main parties? And with hindsight, was your party wrong, or David Cameron wrong, to label them as has been well publicised as fruitcakes and sort of those who are not to be taken?
Let me split the question. Firstly, are they one of the main parties? No, they're a protest party. They still are. And
we don't know that, do we?
Well,
we don't know
you
that.
You asked me my opinion.
Okay.
My opinion is no, and the reason I say that is because Nigel Farage, who I quite like, I've been on lots of programs with him. We have great fun skirmishing. He describes them as a sort of protest party. He says, our job is to change and influence the nature of British politics, which, to be fair to him, he's doing. But, so I see them still as a protest party. I do not see them as a main party. I think if we don't pay attention to them, and I'll come back to what that means in a minute, if we don't pay attention to them properly, we could turn them into a main party, and that wouldn't be good for the Conservative Party. I think in the long run wouldn't be good for the country either. Now, the second half of the question. Yes, I thought the truth of the matter is, I think it's never a good idea to be rude about your opponents. We're in a democracy. We have proper differences of opinion. We should not be intolerant of somebody who has a different view to us. And I was talking to people who voted UKIP in my constituency last week. We had a little by-election, literally where I live, a local by-election, and they were perfectly normal, decent people. A lot of them ex-Tory voters, lower middle class, I think most of them, but not all of them, and really, what you would call sort of aspirant Tories, many of them. These weren't loonies and fruitcakes and closet racists, whatever the things that were said about them. So it's always a bad idea to be rude about the other party, because apart from anything else, the people who vote for it think you're being rude about them too. And I'm sure that wasn't the intention, and I think it was a mistake, and I don't think it's a mistake that my party will ever repeat.
The thing is that the issues which people feel very strongly about, and no doubt they nobble you and talk about when you're out in the street because you are so well known, are the ones that you would expect your party to do naturally. But they're not now doing that, and they're almost handing on a plate what are typical values that your party would have to somebody else.
Well, there are two different reasons for that, and they sort of overlap. One of them is, of course, that we're in a coalition, and so let's say European policy or immigration policy, two big issues for UKIP. not to mention tax and justice policy, but European and immigration policy are areas where, in effect, what the Prime Minister can do is constrained by the Liberal Party. They have a very, very different view on Europe, certainly to me, and a very, very different view on immigration. So that's part of the reason. The other part of the reason, of course, is internal to the Tory Party. There was a lot of feeling in 2005 in the Tory Party that we sort of didn't do well in that election because we talked too much about immigration. That made us look not very nice and unpleasant. Now, I don't happen to agree with that, but that's one of the views that's taken inside my party. I think it's perfectly possible to talk about immigration without being nasty about it, without being unpleasant. You know, we are a tolerant country. We approve of immigration, but in managed numbers, not in unmanaged, overwhelming numbers, which is what happened. So that's part of the reason. The other thing is, of course, the Tory Party is terrified, or has been historically terrified, about talking about Europe because its last experience, shall we say, with the European issue was not a good one. You know, the long battles during John Major's tenure as Prime Minister, which led to the worst defeat we had in a century. So you can see why, but the raw truth is, if political parties do not talk about the things that matter to the constituents, then they end up losing those constituents and giving them to other parties. That's what's been going on. So we've got to get a grip of it.
And just finally, in the last minute or so, is it actually technically possible to if the will is there, to organise a referendum on the EU in and out in the next Parliament?
In this Parliament or the next? You mean before the next election?
Well, no, that's definitely not possible, is it?
Oh, I think even that's possible.
Is it?
Leave us to plot that down here, but I think it's certainly possible to do it in the next Parliament, absolutely, and indeed there must be. I mean, it's long overdue that the British people were given a say on their future in Europe. Long overdue, you know. I have views on what that say should say, but it's for them to decide, not for me to decide. And so it's got to happen. If we don't have a referendum, irrespective of who wins the next election, I'm hoping it's going to be us, but irrespective of it, if we don't have a referendum on Europe in the next election with what's going on in the Eurozone, all the problems and disasters that's happening, then I think parties like Ukip will grow like topsy. So we really have to deal with the issue, not just for our political interest, but for the democratic rights of the British people. So we have to do it.
Final question: if Nigel Farage was to stand in somewhere like Boston, given the feeling at the moment, do you think he would be in with a chance of winning?
No, I don't. Not now, not at the moment. But I think if we continue to ignore the issue, then yes, he would. I mean, I thought for a second you were going to say Holton, Price and Howden. He would get completely proud.
Always very good to have you on the programme. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye now.
David Davis, MP